I'm delighted to have a truly exceptional person to talk to today. Sir Ken Olisa, OBE, is a British businessman and philanthropist. Born in Nottingham, he started his career at IBM, then went to office automation pioneer Wang Laboratories, where he worked in the UK and the US before becoming general manager for Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, based in Brussels. After Wang, Ken founded and led the AIM-listed technology merchant bank Interregnum, and now leads Restoration Partners. He was the first British-born black man to serve on the board of a major UK public company, which was Reuters, and he's been a non-exec at Thomson Reuters, Eurasian National Resources Corporation, ENRC, Huawei UK, and is deputy chairman of the Institute of Directors. Today, he's chairman of Nigeria's largest e-payments company, Interswitch, and one of the UK's largest charities, Shaw Trust, amongst many other roles. He also serves on the boards or advises several privately held, innovative companies, including the UK's leading corporate governance advisor, Independent Audit. In 2015, Her Majesty the Queen appointed Ken as her Lord Lieutenant in Greater London. 2016, he was voted #1 in the Power List's top 10 most influential British black people. And in 2018, he was knighted for services to business and philanthropy. Wow, that's quite some CV, Sir Ken.
I'm an old man.
There are so many questions I could ask you about your fascinating career, but I want to start with corporate governance. Boardrooms are often described as a closed door, and you are famous for describing ENRC as more Soviet than City when they removed you from their board. Can you remind us of what happened and what you took from this episode for corporate governance?
Yes, good morning. Well, ENRC was a Kazakhstan-based mining company which listed in the UK and was in the top, well, in the FTSE 50 essentially from day one. And it was precisely the kind of company that the UK needs to attract to the UK public markets. So it was a poster child of that particular era's global reach for the UK. What we learned on that particular board was that, having been a private company for a very long time, the former owners, who became shareholders, find it impossible to acknowledge that it was no longer their company. And they exercised overreach into the executive, who of course also found it quite hard to understand that their lifetime boss was no longer their boss. And the board struggled to get the balance back where what we would consider to be normal standards of corporate governance in the UK applied. It became a cause célèbre, which ended up with Sir Richard Sykes and me being ousted from the board, having made a firm stand for British standards of corporate governance. The lesson learned is that rules and principles is a really important distinction. In the UK, our philosophy is essentially principles-based, and you can't dodge a principle, but you can find a way around a rule. And what happened with the NRC, very expensive lawyers helped the former owners navigate their way around the rules, whilst at the same time, therefore, really opposing the principles. And Sykes and I stood for and then stood down as a result of those principles.
Does that mean that we should really avoid legislating for corporate governance, because that's by definition rules rather than principles?
I'm a very strong believer that we can legislate the principles, and I think the Section 172 of the Companies Act does that brilliantly, but there is a move afoot at the moment to move closer to the Sarbanes-Oxley approach to, quote, corporate governance, and it isn't. Sarbanes-Oxley is a set of rules about how you present your financial data, and the number of failures in America post Sarbanes-Oxley demonstrate that it hasn't solved that problem. You can't hide from a principle, you can get round a rule.
So what do you think of the current government proposals on the white paper on corporate governance then? Because there are a lot of rules in that, aren't there?
Yes, so at some point it is a good idea to convert a principle into a rule so people know what to do. So I'm not anti-rules, but the more you become obsessed with rules and forget the principles, the more you end up giving lots of scope for bad people to find ways around things. And I'm particularly opposed to Sarbanes-Oxley and that move in that direction. I was a victim of Sarbanes-Oxley. I was on the board of one of the ones you didn't mention in my resume, but I was on the board of OpenText, a NASDAQ company. And I will never forget the trauma of trying to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley. And the night when the auditors said, okay, we're done, and we had a party to celebrate, that's not what governance should be about. That was nothing to do with competitive advantage and winning in the market. That was about following some jobs-worth prescriptions.
Do you think there's value in the attestation by the CFO and the CEO, though, rather than the rigorous rules and box ticking of checks?
Well, I'm against the rigorous rules that you will have gathered. I think all directors have to attest. I mean, that is why you have directors. And if they fail, then they should be removed. I think picking on two people means that they will become isolated from the rest. The collective, joint and several, begins to be diluted. I think that whole direction of travel is a mistake.
Are there any aspects of the white paper that you think would make a significant difference to good governance?
Well, obviously, yes. I'm not a complete destructive person here, but I think the debate is the wrong debate. What I'm rather delighted to have seen is the weights principles for private businesses, not just because they now encompass private companies with a code of conduct, or yes, a code of behaviour at any rate, within the UK, but also because what weights does, it makes the focus on strategy much, much more important. So we've come from Cadbury, when we focused on getting the finances honest, to now having to explain to the public, to the stakeholders, the people on whom you depend, what your strategy is. That's a much more important, I think, innovation than tinkering around trying to show that we're tough. A big part of our national competitive advantage is our system of governance. And we need to protect it and not let it look like everybody else's system of governance. And it might not be 100% right. It's a little bit like the monarchy. You can't really defend it from first principles, but we do defend it to the death in reality. And we need to protect our systems of corporate governance in the UK because it makes us different from France or New York, or Paris rather, or New York. And so it's a really valuable national asset. So when Robert Maxwell did what he did, it doesn't matter how many rules we would have put in place, the bloke was a crook. And crooks don't care about rules. They welcome them because suckers follow the rules and crooks can get around them. But when you look to his board of directors at the time, had we looked at them at the time and challenged them on the principles, they, as true Brits, they would have then shuffled around, looked embarrassed, been shifty, and had to do something. But the minute that somebody assures you that they've found a way around the rule, and the most egregious example at the moment is what's happened at the post office with the sub-postmasters. So for years, the board of the post office were being told by their lawyers, I'm sure, that they were on the right side, there was a way of winning this, etc., etc., etc. So they pursued those people to prison, to suicide, to destruction, to collapse their reputations. And now it all comes tumbling down. Someone had shone a principled light at them, it would have been a very different outcome. But you hide behind lawyers when rules become involved, which is, of course, the American model. And we adopt that at our peril. Single point that this drift towards, I'm not sure it's a drift, this move towards more prescription, I think is very dangerous because it won't solve the problem. You know, American companies are still going bust despite Sarbanes-Oxley, etc. And they're going bust for the wrong reasons. Wirecard was a really good example of a recent scandal in the European context. You know, and there are lots of rules in Germany. They invented rules, for goodness sake. And it's not about rules, it's about conduct and it's about scrutiny. And so making sure that shareholders scrutinize companies is much more important. Not just shareholders, though, across the stakeholder universe. The supply chain should be able to scrutinize things, etc. And that's what Section 172 does. Having regards for those different categories of stakeholder is a much more British approach to solving the problem of good behavior than trying to write it in a rule.
Thank you. That was very interesting, Sir Ken, and it's great to hear governance views from someone who's suffered poor governance, because I think once you've been on the wrong end of poor governance, you certainly are keen on good one.
As Frank Muir once put it in a different context, my experience in ENRC was the same or akin to that the rat has in the laboratory at school.
And that's a vision that we'll take away. Thank you, Sir Ken.